Thanks for having me out here. So a couple of things. One is I don't typically go off of slides, but with a larger group, we need something to lean on. And then what typically happens with this topic is people say, can you send me a copy of your notes or your slide deck? So you'll get a copy of this afterwards. Happy to share it. And as Coop said also, feel free to jump in. We should make this interactive. This happens to be, this idea of being ghosted happens to be a challenge in the world of sales. It was pre-COVID. It was a challenge during COVID. And since COVID, it continues to be a challenge. So if you're not familiar with Sandler Training, we are a worldwide sales and leadership training firm. And we're pretty good at what we do. Some people would say we're probably the best in the industry, but who knows? Our clients seem to like us. They seem to stick around for a long time. So we're going to take a deep dive into this. We're going to talk a little bit about tactic and what's going on here. I can't fix everything today, but I assure you there's a couple of nuggets in here that if you put into place, they will make a difference. Also, we might do a little bit of role playing. Typically, it's me doing the role playing. Sharing some ideas, and there's going to be moments where you say, I won't do that, or I can't do that. That doesn't make any sense. At Sandler, everything we teach is really designed to make a salesperson not look like a salesperson. So that's the typical reaction our clients give us is, that's not going to work for me, or I don't think I could do that. I don't feel comfortable. And everything we teach is really designed to do the exact opposite of what a buyer would expect from a salesperson. And it doesn't make a difference what you sell. The tactics, the process, the tools that we teach apply to every business. And I could share, I could spend the next 5 minutes sharing all the different industries that we work in. And if you do have a question or a challenge, please jump in. So I just ask a quick show of hands. I'm going to actually just expand you guys on my screen for a second. And not everybody has their camera on. So if you're in a position where you can put your camera on and or unmute, that would be awesome, and jump in. But if you looked at your business, and because I don't know everybody's business, I don't know everybody on this line, quick show of hands. Does anybody ever set up an appointment and perhaps the prospect doesn't show? Does that happen to anybody here? So it does happen. So Chip's going, yeah, that does happen to me. Okay, so Chip, I wouldn't have expected that to happen with you. And I'm sure that this doesn't happen to anybody, where you spend a few hours with a prospect and you put together a proposal, you hand it off to that prospect, and perhaps they never return your call and don't ever give you a decision, where they don't even tell you yes, they don't tell you no, it's just kind of hanging out there. Does that happen to anybody? Quick show of hands there. Okay. Chip's reluctantly putting his hand up. Chip's going, wait a second,
I'm just sitting at the wrong spot on the couch is the problem today.
You're on the wrong spot on my screen because you're right at my eye level, Chip. So I'll move you so I can go throw somebody else into your spot and pick on someone else. So in the world of sales, this idea of ghosting, and I didn't learn the term ghosting until about 18 months ago when a client brought it up. I wasn't familiar with the term, but I knew exactly what it meant, in the sense that prospects disappear on us. They disappear for whatever reason. We're not qualifying hard enough. But over my years of being in the Sandler world, there are things that I've learned that most salespeople think that just comes with the territory. And ghosting is one of them. So the idea of, I gave out a proposal, I gave it to my prospect said, I'll reach back to you next week. And then next week comes, then the following week you're leaving a voicemail. Many salespeople believe that that's just part of the challenge of being a salesperson. And I've got to figure out tactics and techniques to get that prospect out of the dark. When the reality is, we can actually fix that on the front end, significantly fix that on the front end by not only qualifying harder, I think that's probably the easy term, but employing some of the tactics that we'll talk about today. So it's something that actually, it's like playing golf. If you're familiar with golf, you don't want to end up in the sand trap. People work hard to figure out how to get out of the sand trap. the idea is not to get in the sand trap, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So I love, again, keep your mics open. We have a group that is absolutely manageable. There's 25 people on here. So if you want to chime in, it's either raise your hand or just call out, because I'm kind of sliding you guys back and forth on my screen. So let's talk about this. Here's what we're going to cover, and you'll get this depth. We're in sales, so we got to understand that. We're going to talk about making strong agreements. So I don't know if anybody on the call is familiar with Sandler. That's kind of, that's one of the cornerstone steps in our process and in our techniques is making strong agreements to move deals through the pipeline efficiently from start to finish. It's also how we disqualify people better. We're going to eliminate think it overs. We're going to talk about prospects. How do they buy from you? I'm going to talk about a concept of working in reverse. And I assure you that if you can, I can't guarantee it because you can't make too many guarantees, but I feel pretty comfortable saying if you work in reverse and employ some of those tactics, you'll have a better chance of winning more deals. We'll talk about the psychology behind how to get people to do things that maybe we can drive them to, as opposed to asking wimpy type questions. And with that comes some what we call embedded commands. And again, speak up. What are your goals? Let's learn about them, best practices, and use that chat feature. And again, just call out or raise your hand if you want to. So let me ask this question. And again, if you can unmute or maybe just put it into the chat box. And Coop, if you could manage the chat box, that'd be awesome. Think about salespeople that you deal with. Put on your buyer's hat for a moment. What do you think about salespeople? What are some of the words, adjectives, characteristics you think about someone that's trying to sell you something? Cooper,
some people are aggressive.
Steven, say that again.
Some people they're aggressive.
They're aggressive
Instead of helpful.
Yeah, instead of helpful. Maybe they're pushy instead of acting in my best interest. Absolutely. Love it. Other comments here.
Yeah, I got a couple. William Court said that they're desperate. And Bryant Brackett said that sometimes they're corny.
Corny, desperate. Kim, what were you going to say?
They don't listen enough. They talk too much.
Those freaking salespeople talk way too much, don't they? That's because they're desperate and they need to sell something, so they don't act in your best interest. If we were better listeners, that would be awesome. So if we have these beliefs about salespeople, and you guys, you folks, I don't know everybody on this call, so there's probably a mix. If we're in sales and we have that belief, think about our typical buyer who may not be in sales. What do they feel about salespeople? They're super uncomfortable. They're suspicious of what the salesperson has hidden up their sleeves. They're going to take advantage of me. So we've got to break the pattern. So we use a term at Sandler, and you can look it up on Google, called pattern interrupt. And that's really what we're talking about today. Some of the concepts and really some of the elements are, how do we act and look differently than the traditional salesperson? So Kim, actually, you nailed one of them. If we go back in time, so many salespeople, we've observed so many salespeople who have the gift of gab. They're great talkers. They can convince people to do things that only they can do because they're so smooth. Well, if I look too smooth in the world of sales, I'm going to be treated like a traditional salesperson. If I act in my own best interest, I'm going to be treated like a traditional salesperson. If I listen a little bit more and I act in the best interest of the prospect and I go in with a mindset of gathering information versus dispensing information, I will not look like a traditional salesperson. So I'll throw out a couple of just tidbits here. One is, most salespeople that we deal with, before they become Sandler trained, they're focused on how fast can I get to the presentation. Once I can get to my pitch, this is going to be golden. Imagine if we held off on the pitch and the presentation until we really knew what was in the best interest of the prospect. Any thoughts or comments there? Anybody have a thought?
I mean, I'll jump in briefly. And sometimes in the world of sales, whether we're coming off as being desperate or corny, we try to tell them what we want to sell them, but really we need to sell the outcome that they tell us. Like, let's gather feedback. You know, in many situations, I just listen to what they say and then I regurgitate it back and be like, we can do this for you. Does that work?
Coop, hang on to that because that's a piece of gold. So hang on to that for a second. Christine, you were going to jump in.
I was basically just going to say, I usually start my demos with, what are your pain points? So I don't go into they don't want to know about my platform. They don't care. They just want to know how are you going to fix my problem? So I started off that way. And then I kind of, make my presentation geared to what they're looking for.
So Christine and Coop, let's squeeze. By the way, any other comments here? Anybody else want to chime in? So let's squeeze those together. I believe, by the way, I've observed thousands of salespeople we've assessed and worked with, tons of salespeople. Most traditional salespeople are moving so fast that they want to tell what it is they can do. To Christine's point, we worry, we put together slide decks, we talk about the features and benefits of our organization where none of that actually matters. What does matter is if we go in with a focus of, I'm going to gather information, I'm going to ask a lot of good questions, I'm going to understand what's in the prospect's best interest. And if I do that, then I build my presentation around that. And I'm not doing this justice, there's way more to this. But I build my presentation, I build my solution around your needs, which means a couple of things. One is if I'm building them around your needs and I listen to what Coop says, and Coop just gave you the word, he said the word, I just regurgitate their words back. I might use the term, I summarize and validate back. I listen, a little more politically correct. I listen for what your pain points are. I summarize, make sure that I heard them and say to the prospect, did I get that right? Validate them. When I do that, one of two things happens. They give me more information and I'm working with them. I'm not working at my pace. I'm working alongside them. That can be output number one. Output number two is we identify that they're not a great fit for us. And the more we find people that are not great fits, the better chances we have to work with prospects that are good fits. And I'll give you a great example because we do work with Coop and team. We send out email communications. I'm sure many of you use that service. And we get phone calls from prospects. And we get on calls and they're on, you know what, we don't need sales training. Here's what we need training with. And we shoot them back to Coop. Or we shoot them to another partner. And they end up becoming friends and colleagues of ours because we've acted in their best interest and we didn't try to shoehorn in a solution. So I could spend, again, another hour but on this topic alone, but we've got to break the pattern. We've got to ask more questions, intentionally operate in the best interest of the prospect, and that will change the game. That's a pattern interrupt. Do things a little bit different than other salespeople. I would argue that 80% of salespeople that are out there, they have very high self-interest and they're going to sell on features and benefits. Let me keep moving here. Any questions or thoughts? So again, if there's anything, drop it into the chat. Coop, if you could just keep an eye on that, or if somebody calls out, please, or raise a hand, please grab them. So step two, or key number two, making strong agreements. And again, I'm not sure who is familiar with Sandler or who's not, but I'm not going to do justice to what we call the upfront contract at Sandler. What I will talk about is going hard on the no, especially in the first meeting or early in sales calls. So if you were to ever take a sales meeting with myself or one of my colleagues, going into that meeting, we're going to put out the option, and Chip, I'll pick on you for a second. Again, you're right in line, side of line. You don't have to do anything but just hang out there. I'm going to just call on your name. But if I'm meeting with Chip early on, I am telling Chip right out of the gate, hey, when we get together, Chip, there's going to typically be 3 outcomes here at the conclusion of our meeting. And I'm going to say, and I'm going to lead with this, hey, Chip, there's a likelihood that if I don't think I can help you, I'm going to let you know that. Are you okay with that, Chip? Chip says, of course. And I say, hey, Chip, if you don't think I'm a good fit for you, I want you to feel super comfortable that you can tell me that a no is okay. Are you okay with that?
Right.
So as I'm getting my meeting set up, I am closing out my call, let's say, saying, Chip, a no is okay. I lead with that. Then I tell them what yes could look like, and then I tell them what a next step would look like. And maybe we could talk about that if anyone has questions. But I'm leaning earlier on in the sale to no being an okay outcome. Anybody want to venture why I want to give Chip the opportunity to say no, and why I might want to push a little bit harder on the gas earlier on in the call?
It's a way to disarm them and put them at ease that they're not being forced to be sold.
The mind of the buyer is, if I don't want to buy this, how am I going to say no to this salesperson? And Chip, you nailed it. If we don't disarm them, we open up the floodgates for, I need to check with a spouse. I need to check with somebody else in the business. My CFO is going to need to look at this. I'll get back to you in a couple of weeks. I'll reach back out to you by the end of this week. I want prospects to have a disarmed feeling that a no is absolutely okay here. Any other thoughts here?
No, it's awesome.
So I'm going to lean on that. And now let me go back to the way that I said it. And Jason, thanks for saying that's awesome. I love when people say awesome. So if I go back to Chip, I'm leading with, hey, Chip, when we get to the conclusion of our first meeting, there's a chance that I'm not going to be able to help you. And if you're okay with that, I'm going to let you know. Step 1. Step 2, Chip, if you don't feel comfortable or you don't think I can help you, you tell me. Why do you think I'm telling him out of the gate that I can tell him no?
Equal stature.
Chip, are you Sandler trained?
I am.
Chip was the great guy to call, and I did not know that. Equal business stature. I have as much of a right to make a decision whether or not we do business here. And here's the shift, and Chip probably already knows this. Our brain gets in the way of this. Most salespeople want to sell everybody. Everybody's a prospect. I want to sell everybody. Our attitude, and Sandler rule says this, not everybody is qualified to be a prospect. That may mean that they don't have the investment to do business with you. The timing may be off. You may not like them. They may not like you. Or back to Christine, their pains may be something that we don't solve. Or maybe their pains are so bad that we can't solve them. Stephen, jump in.
Just a quick question. When you're speaking about this, is your experience in you selling to a consumer or you selling to a business to a consumer? Does it matter?
So it doesn't matter. So
Okay.
here's what happens, Stephen, with them. And by the way, I do know Stephen, so good to see you, Stephen. Here's what happens. The people in the B2B world go, that's much easier to do in the B2C world. And the folks in the B2C world say, that's much easier to do in the B2B world. The reality is, we've got to find our own voice here. What words work best for us? You know, just because Dave Trapani does it this way doesn't mean that we should all walk away and say, yeah, that's the way I've got to do it. You've got to get yourself into that comfort zone, but it's going to work equally in both scenarios.
Yep.
Great question. Love it. Love it. I'm going to keep moving here. So getting permission to ask questions. Quick show of hands, and I know we don't have everybody on camera, but just a quick show of hands, or maybe even use your keys to do like a thumbs up. Who feels like sometimes when they go into a sales call that they're doing an interrogation? Anybody ever feel that? Or like sales training has conditioned us that we have to have an interrogation. I got to ask a lot of questions. I'm not seeing many hands go up here. Couple.
I'll say that I don't know if I go in as an interrogator or that I'm going in as somebody who's trying to be malicious, but I am strategic in what I've done previous to that call happening to investigate what questions I might want to ask,
Okay.
so that I know what the outcome could be at step 5 before that person and I even have that first discussion. I'm more calculated in my pre-call research as to what questions strategically can I place within that conversation that gets them to already like, know, and trust me a little bit more by the time we're ready to take those next steps.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm interrogating them, but I am always very intentional with my pre-call research to know that I've got a methodology to the madness, and that if I do things and measure them and get feedback on them, then I know what's really working and what's not. And I've always been told that if you're not owning the data, you don't own anything. And the data will tell the story of the outcomes, the predictability, the scalability, and
Yeah.
the success ultimately.
Yeah, love it, Coop. Are there any other comments here? Anybody else want to jump in?
I think sometimes these clients don't really know what their pain point is.
They don't know what it is. So Chip, we've got to, you're familiar with the pain funnel. We've got to keep peeling back the onion. So our mindset, and Chip, as a Sandler trained individual, our mindset typically is, how do I get to that presentation? And even the buyer's mindset might be, how quickly is this salesperson going to tell me what they can do for me? Because that's what all of your competition is doing. Your competition is jumping to a solution. Here's what I can do for you. So we want to, once again, level the playing field and let prospects know, we're going to ask you a lot of questions. We may not get to a solution today because I'm here to, and I wouldn't use these words, I'm here to gather information. I am really here to understand what your pains are, and then we'll figure out how do we develop that solution. So gain that permission to ask questions. We literally say, hey, Coop, I might ask you a lot of questions. Jason, I might ask you some personal questions about your business. Are you okay sharing that information? Give them a heads up, level the playing field. Gain agreement from the prospect on whatever you're doing, and make potential outcomes clear. Define what yes looks like. Now, in my business at Sandler, in a first call, you are not buying from me. It's an extreme rarity that I am a one call close, regardless of size of deal. And I tell every prospect that I sit down with, if you take this first meeting with me, 30 minutes, and typically I go for the nose and I say, here's what if you, in the rarest sense, think that this is really for you, we'll figure that out. But I can tell you, it's rare that anybody buys from me in a first sales call. Now, as I go down the path, remember, we're going hard on the no early, but when I get to my second and third meetings, depending upon deal size, I'm starting to clearly define what yes looks like. And at a minimum, what I'm consistently doing, and mark this down, and Chip, you're going to either make a comment or give me a thumbs up on this one. And everybody should take this one and go run with it. Every meeting that I go on, that I teach the folks that I work with, if there is a potential to do business, it doesn't mean that you're doing business, but if there's some reason to continue to get together, that meeting gets set before we hang up the phone, end the Zoom call, or walk out of their office. I never leave a next meeting to chance. And that's exactly what we teach. And that's exactly what our clients attempt to do. It's a little bit harder to do because they get in their head going, oh, this was a great meeting. I'm not so sure I'm comfortable asking Steven, can you get your calendar out? Suggest we get our calendars out. Let's move to that next meeting. What works for you the end of next week? Consistently, before you leave a meeting, get the next meeting on your calendar. If it's on your calendar, some salespeople have a really locked and loaded process. Depends where you work, depends kind of your process, but they say, oh, we got a 3-step process, we've got a 5-step process, whatever it is. If you don't have a locked and loaded process, put the next meeting on your calendar, and you can figure out what has to happen in that meeting between that call and the time that next call takes place. This doesn't have to be an all or nothing. but you want to consistently keep people on your calendar. Chip, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down on that one. Got Chip in my corner right now. Comments, thoughts here. If you do that last piece alone, keep prospects on your calendar. I'm going to go in, actually, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into this. If I'm selling to Brian Brackett and we have a first meeting and I move the second meeting, we wrap up meeting one. I say, hey, Brian, get your calendar out. Boom, we're locked into that next meeting. One of two things happens. Brian says yes, or Brian says, can I give you a call next week and see what works? Or I need to think about this. In my world, if he needs to think about this, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about this later, what is that typically an indication of?
Sayonara. Yeah.
Sayonara. We're never going to hear from Brian again. If he's on my calendar, he's better qualified to move forward. So my process gets faster. I'm not chasing Brian to get him on the calendar. I've done it in that moment. We'll talk a little bit more about that in depth. If you can employ that tactic walking away from today, you will be a better salesperson tomorrow. I have no doubt about that.
And Brian, just to interrupt you briefly, David, Brian, were you going to try to say something? I saw you unmute yourself.
Yeah. I just have a question because I'm a big fan of booking the meeting from the meeting that you're in, booking that next step. But a lot of times in a complex sale in a B2B world, it requires multiple departments' attentions and coordinating those schedules as well. It doesn't necessarily disqualify them, like it's not going to happen, but it does make it a little bit more complicated booking that meeting. How would you approach that problem?
So I haven't gotten to that page in the book yet, so you got to forgive me. So how do I address it? By the way, Brian sounds like he's selling enterprise type solutions. So Brian, what I'm going to look to do in those situations is a couple of things. I'm going to look to who's my best leader in that group, and perhaps lean on them a little bit. Hey, Brian, can I make a suggestion? Why don't you and I get our calendars out? Let's open it up. Let's placehold a day and a time. We're probably going to need 90 minutes. Let's placehold a day and a time for that to work. And then you and I can circle back together. When you get everybody coordinated, you and I can circle back together and make sure that that day and time works. Now, when I do that, and Brian raises a great question that he didn't ask. So now Brian and we're working on a mega deal. There's 4 or 5 decision makers, CFO, HR person, marketing person, you name it. We need to get all these people included. Brian says, yeah, you know what, Dave? We're going to get on the calendar for June 24th at 11 a.m. for 90 minutes. I say to Brian, can you coordinate everybody's calendar? He says, yes. I say, hey, Brian, one of the challenges that we typically run into. So I'm going to build another mini step here. Brian, one of the challenges we sometimes run into is you're going to go out of this meeting. I'm going to go out. We're going to go 1,000 miles an hour. You might not be able to coordinate with everybody. Can I make a quick suggestion? Why don't you and I take 10 minutes next Tuesday, a couple of days in advance of the meeting, and you and I get 10 minutes, and let's see how we're progressing to getting all of those folks on the calendar. If we haven't done that, we can figure out an alternative way to do that, or we might have to find an alternative date. Can you and I put that on the calendar as well? And what I've done is I've created a little mini step that keeps Brian and I, our momentum going forward. Now, again, I'm sure there's folks on the phone going, hey, I don't know if that works, if that's going to work. I'm not sure if that'll work in my business. I've seen it work at all levels of organizations. Is it 100% foolproof? No. Is it high percentage foolproof? Yes. But I've seen it work with senior level executives at Fortune 500 companies get locked in and fall right into line here. It'll get into, Brian, again, it's a great question because it's leading us a little bit ahead in what we're talking about. It also is teaching this prospect, if you're doing this early on, how to buy from you, how you're going to do things. And on this call, there might be alternative ways to do that, like working with an admin or working with one person who's kind of the gatekeeper. There's certainly ways to do that. That's certainly what I just shared as a tactic that we're teaching. I don't know if that helps. Brian, does that help answer the question a bit?
It does, yes. Thank you.
Cool, cool. Thank you for asking. And Coop, thanks for picking up on him.
Yeah, and I can tell you from my own selfish perspective, it has worked. So when we're working with bigger enterprise partners and we do have to collaborate and bring 10 people on the line, I absolutely create that little mini step of accountability so that I know if it's really going to happen. Because guess what? The success, I don't leave it to chance and fate. I take control. And if that control is too overbearing, I always apologize, but I'm just trying to do what's in the best interest of the partnership there so that we can get to the next level, because everyone's going to measure the relationship on the outcomes. And did we do the right things? And something here at NerdWise, I believe people really love is the process, the due diligence. And even in the onboarding, it starts from the very beginning. There has to be steps to get things done. And if you're not doing that, you don't have a process.
Absolutely. This is what I would call a micro process. And just a quick third-party story. We have a client that sells in the pharma space, and they sell to hospitals all across the US. Their primary customer is chief surgeons at the hospitals. So you're talking pretty high level folks. And the decision-making process is pretty complicated. Pharmacy gets involved and some other areas get involved. And they've employed the tactic that Brian and I were just talking about. What they tend to do is they tend to coordinate through an admin, the admin of that chief surgeon, and navigate all of the moving parts through that chief surgeon. And it tends to work pretty flawlessly. But that's their process. They kind of, that evolved into a great way to make that happen. So I'm going to hit this slide quick. Eliminating think it overs, no mutual mystification. So when you hear those terms, hey, I need to think it over, let me get back to you. Don't take it as, don't take Dave Trapani as 100% correct here. In my business, when I hear that, it's typically a sign that we're not doing business. I know from my own data what those kiss of death statements are, kiss of death words are. So when I hear those, I'm going to challenge the prospect and say, hey, listen, the suspicion is that we're probably not going to do business here. And then this final rule, Sandler rule number 3, which is no mutual mystification, kind of goes back to the previous slide. If we can create a better understanding of what's going to happen every step of the way, we start to reduce stress. Somebody used the term, it might have been Chip or somebody else, disarming the buyer. The more the buyer knows what you're going to do to them and how this process is going to move forward, the better chance you have of eliminating mutual mystification, but advancing that deal forward. Makes it very clear.
Question,
Yeah, sure.
and you may get to this. I did obviously do some work with Sandler several years ago, and I was delighted that you were going to be doing this as a refresher. You haven't gotten to it, and you may get to it, but the equalization, if you will, of we may not be a good fit for you, you may not be a good fit for us.
Yeah.
Where do you gauge that in terms of, and whether you put somebody on a defensive or not? I'm going to be upfront with you. You might not be a best fit for us either. Is that something that you recommend or not?
I do, Chip, and I'm pretty. I would say I like to use the term I'm a one-trick pony. So I'm pretty consistent in saying, let's imagine you and I are taking that first meeting. I'm fairly consistent on saying, hey, Chip, before I hang up the phone and we get together next week, I just want to share with you what I think some of the outcomes are. Number one is I can tell you no. So there, I'm going out right out ahead of the curve and telling you that I can say no. And I'm going to add a little element here, which is critical to where I believe your question is coming from. I'm going to say, are you okay with that? Because I want your validation that you are now going, that you are saying, yes, it's cool. And I've had people say, I would really appreciate if you told me that you couldn't have me, help me. So I'm going to go for that. I'm going to use the line and I'm going to validate it. Then my next move is going to be very simple. And likewise, Chip, listen, you may not like me. You may not think I'm the guy that can help you or the firm that can help you. Will you be comfortable letting me know if that's the case, that we're not going to move forward. Are you okay with that? So I'm using validation to really get your buy-in. It doesn't work 100% of the time. There are people who will go with that and they'll say, yeah, we'll do all that stuff. But you know where the test really comes on this and creating that equal business stature is the conclusion of that first meeting. Because Chip and I have agreed, and when I show up at that meeting, I say, hey, Chip, remember, here's what could happen at the end of the meeting. At the end of the meeting, I could disqualify Chip, he could disqualify me. If there's no disqualification and we're opening our calendar for the next one, that's the moment of truth. When Chip says, I'm not putting you on the calendar just yet, I'll need to get back to you. For me, you just told me no is your answer. And then I will draw that out of you. I'll say, hey, listen, Chip, my suspicion is this is probably a no. You're just not comfortable telling me. So I would say early on, it's putting those words out there, high level of disarming going on, high level of comfort to tell me no, and then the truth comes at the conclusion of the next meeting.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yep.
Really a mindset thing also. The words are easy. We could all do that right here. We could practice it. Doing it in real life, not that easy. Because a lot of salespeople go, wait, why would I tell a prospect that no is okay? But again, we are pattern interrupt. It's okay. A no is great in the world of sales. It lets me get to better prospects that I can actually go out and help. Great question. Great question. So tell a prospect how to buy from you. You know, I think that the second bullet here really plays out a lot here. Hey, Coop, listen, if we get to a second meeting, here's what's going to happen in a second meeting. At some point, we're going to need to involve key decision makers. At some point, I'm going to want to know, you're going to want to share with me your investment that you're willing to make. I want to tell Coop what's going to happen to him at some point in the future. I don't want to wait for the moment of truth. So I'm going to outline the steps of the buying process. So step one, Coop, we get together for 30 minutes. If we think at the end of 30 minutes that there's a fit, we'll go to step two. And in that meeting, I'm going to share with you how I think I can help you. I'm going to share with you and you'll share with me the budget that's going to take to fix this. We're outlining the steps. Buyers and people in general like to know what's going to happen to them before it actually happens. And then let me hit this last line here for a second. We have prospects that say things like, well, how do you fix blank? And this is a golden line. I'll give you the deck, but if you can work this line into your sales, your talk tracks, we'll call them, this is how I work with clients like you. So let's imagine we have an accounting firm that comes to us, or we have Jason Smith comes to us, and we're having a great conversation. If I get asked a certain question, or if I can rephrase something, I say, hey, Jason, let me share with you how I work with clients like you. I build instant credibility. And I'll give you an example of this. The moment Jason hears that I work with clients like him, he's going, oh, good, they've seen this before. So we have clients who long-term, where the prospect says, we're going to do this in January. January 2022, we're going to do this. And for them to sell their product, it takes 3 to 4 months. Today's June. If in fact, and we'll get a little bit more into the weeds on this, if in fact somebody on a call today says, we're going to buy this, we're going to do this in January, what they say is, let me share with you how I work with clients like you. Today's June 16th. You're looking to do this on January 1st, 2022. What we're going to do is we're going to open our calendars and we're going to have our next conversation. It'll be a 15-minute conversation at the end of July. And then from there, in early September, we'll get back together again and we'll start looking at contracts and the data and whatever else we need to do. What I'm doing is I'm telling the prospect how to buy my solution, and I'm building it around them based on what they gave me to work with. The risk of not doing this is how I work with clients like you is when somebody says, we'll do this in January, the good salesperson calls them in October. What did we lose when we call them in October, between now and October? We lost 4 months. We lost all that urgency that potentially was here. There could be very good reasons why January is the date. Competing priorities, budget cycles, you name it. So I want to build processes that lead me to the finish line. And the line, this is how I work with clients like you, is something you can embed in based on the data they give you. This is how I work. Let's imagine I'm a one-call close and I'm working with Coop. And Coop says, I'm going to look to do this in August. Coop, this is how I work with someone who's buying 60 days out from now. We'll get something on the calendar for the end of June. 10-minute conversation. I'm going to just ask you what's going on, how that August date is looking. I'll share you any new updates with my business, and then we'll schedule our next meeting to lead us right into August. You okay with that, Coop?
Sounds great.
Thank God he's giving the right answer. So this is how I buy. This is how I work with clients like you. Piece of gold. All right. Let me just get a quick glance at the clock. We're doing great. Any questions? Is anybody learning anything? We're doing okay? People okay? Brian, you're good? All right. So here is what I would say is, again, this is implementable tomorrow if you go out. And this works. Steven Zeiger, great question earlier. Does B2C, B2B? I have not found a business where this doesn't work to date. Which is, I want to understand when the prospect wants to implement the solution as early as possible in the conversation or in the sales process. So what does that mean? And I'll give you some words for this. And Coop, you're recording this, correct?
100%.
Yeah, I'll give you guys some words for this. So Jason, I'm going to pick on you because the way I've maneuvered some things, you're right in the center of my screen. Jason and I are in a first or second meeting because I want to get this early. I say, hey, Jason, question for you. You may not do business with us. Psychological move there. You may not do business with us. So I take it away from a buyer-seller relationship and I move it out to what Christine gave us earlier. Someone is going to need to solve your pains. It may not be us. It's usually a good way to win more business also, this line. Jason, you may not choose to do business with us. But if you had to draw a line in the sand, when would you want to implement this solution? Pick a date.
November 3rd.
November 3rd. Now, you don't have to answer this, but thank you for jumping in there. Why'd you pick that date? Why is that date important? I could dig a little bit deeper into that. Those are some high-level good questions. Jason just gave me gold because if he gives me a date, is he more urgent or less urgent than the prospect who says, I have no idea? So it drives urgency. You may not do business with me, but if you were going to fix this, when would you want to fix this? If they give you a date, we know that they're making a decision. If they don't give you a date, they are apathetic. And that's typically what most of us, I believe most of us lose business to, is not the competition. It's typically somebody just doesn't do anything. They don't change what they're doing. And if Jason, by the way, let me stop for a second. Any questions or thoughts there? If Jason gives me the date, all I do, and for anybody that's engineer or mechanical thinking, I know Steven Zeiger, super process oriented. You build a reverse order process. Here's how I work with someone like you. And I can start to draw milestones. And when I draw milestones, those are connection points to advance through the selling process. So I'm building a timeline. I don't want to be annoying. So if Jason said to me, hey, I'm probably going to do this in early November, I'm not going to say, okay, let's get on the call every week and talk every week and we can see each other. I'm gonna blend it into my business. Hey, let's get together in the next 30 or 45 days and then we'll keep building. Steven Zeiger, jump in.
So I have a question. Let's pretend that someone's in financial services or they mortgages and they're approaching attorneys and accountants and they want to be introduced to the attorneys or accountants' clients, right? And now sometimes the attorney or accountant says, well, I'll keep it in mind, and when a client asks for it, I'll remember you, right? So it's a little different.
Yep.
Can you talk about that? And by the way, this is really helpful. So thanks for doing this.
So Stephen, I love that question, and I'm going to change it up just a hair. So we call these sell-through partners or channel partners or wholesaling. So we have an advocate for us. I'm going to employ the same exact process. Stephen, what I want to do is I want to qualify the heck, and I'll use the accountant in this example. You use an accountant to get to their prospects, to their clients. If I find a good fit accountant that I think can lead me to some great opportunity, I say, awesome. Can I make a suggestion, Stephen? Here's how I work with an accountant like you. Typically, every 45 days, I'm going to pop myself onto your calendar for a 10-minute call. And if you can help me out here, what that'll do is it'll keep my name in front of you, number one. Number two, if anything's changing your business or our business, that'll give us an opportunity to share that information. Your best fit partners, and I'm not saying it has to be 45 days. You have the radio dial. It could be 30 days for your business. It could be 90 days. You base it on the quality of the person that you're working with and what you feel is the best for you. And now I keep that person on the calendar. Here's my biggest fear in that situation. My number one fear is, and I've seen it happen too many times, I sell through Stephen. Stephen's got a great array of clients. I don't have him on my calendar. I waited 4 months. I now pick up the phone. It's November 3rd. I pick up the phone. I go, hey, Stephen, Dave Trapani, what's going on? He goes, oh, Dave, I wish you called me 2 weeks ago. I had an opportunity and I forgot to give it to you. And I'm not saying that they're going to say those words, but I've seen that happen because, again, we don't have connectivity. And we need to be the first person that Stephen thinks of during the selling process. Stephen, here's how I work with someone like you. 45 days we get on the calendar. I'll go one step further. Dave, that seems a little bit too frequent. I don't need to see you every 45 days. I don't get many of these opportunities. No worries, Stephen. What do you think works best for you? He's going to pick something pretty reasonable. And if he says, oh, call me in 6 months, that tells me he may not be so qualified. Hey, Stephen, 6 months is a long way off. My suspicion is if we wait 6 months, we're probably not going to have the type of success or the type of relationship that I have with other folks that I work with. I'm happy, by the way, happy to keep it 6 months if that's what Stephen wants. He just might not be one of my go-to guys. That's all. Stephen, does that help?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have one. A lot of our contracts are 36 months. They're quite a ways out. And you identify someone where they're at, obviously 36 months out, that's almost a no, and we just need to reach back out to them at another time. But this calendaring is really important. I mean, if you can stay on somebody's calendar, even if it's just like, well, okay, it's 6, we just started, we're a year into a 36-month contract. Well, you still know an opportunity.
Yeah.
How do you suggest what's the best way? I mean, obviously we have LinkedIn, we have, other ways of probably just need to stay in front of them and stay on their radar. And again, maybe 6 months is the right time to reach back out to them.
Yeah, Jason, we work with some large financial institutions who very similar challenges, 3-year, 5-year agreements. And so the big opportunity, and they're not selling quantity, they're selling 1 deal, 2 deals a year at big numbers. So again, it's about building your formula for keeping that let's imagine it's 36 months. How do I keep that prospect on the calendar at some level? Is there a network within that prospect of some other folks? Not only just the key decision maker, but maybe some folks that can help advance it. I'm not getting the right term here, but some advocates. And then it's also, are there other little elements that you can drop in? You said LinkedIn. One of our firms does, well, pre-COVID drop-bys. They would deliver candy to the office. At holiday time, they would deliver some pies and stuff. So they were embedding, when we got there, we started to embed what they were doing with some tactic and process. So that when 36 months came around, and really it was 12 months prior to 36 months, is when everything started to heat up. They were right in the driver's seat. This doesn't mean that they're going to win every deal, but they got a seat at the table. So I'm going to inject all your best practices with a little bit of process there to try to bring it, to a place where I get a better shot or more of these shots. Great question. Any other questions? I'll keep us moving here. And I'm going to just pick up my pace just really quick here. Don't ask about next steps, suggest them. People don't know how to buy your stuff. They're not buying it every day. For most products, they're not buying, I got too excited. They're not buying it every day. So you have to tell them. They want you to guide them. If you've ever heard the term, people don't like to be sold to, they like to buy. So here are some terms, and again, you'll get these. We often use some weak language in the world of sales. So things like, hey, Chip, I'd like to get our calendars out. Coop, it would be great if we could. Jason, would you like to? Danielle, I know she's not on screen. I'm very excited to show you. The right-hand side of the screen is embedded commands. When we use these, people have a higher likelihood of taking your lead. These are what I call, and on the next page are what I call unfair advantages. Chip, you'll probably recognize a few of them. Why don't we get our calendars out? You guys have heard me say the word suggestion a lot. Let me make a suggestion. How about this? Let's get our calendars out. We're using more direct language. That will get more people swinging in your direction. So I don't say, hey, can we get our calendars out? Can you look at your calendar? Hey, let's get our calendars out, Chip. How's the end of next week looking? Maybe Thursday or Friday. And that probably sounded a little bit salesy. I didn't like the way I said it, but it does not come across salesy. These are, again, when you start to combine it with we're acting in the prospect's self-interest, this is what gets prospects to take a little bit more action than they would have if we use weak terms. And then I'll just throw out, we're getting to the end, a little bit of psychology here. This is where I'm saying, Chip, you might know these. Put these into your arsenal. This probably won't work. So when somebody's not delivering or not doing maybe something that they're supposed to do, I'll give you an example. Coop didn't send me back, the contract. He hasn't signed it. So I might say, hey, Coop, this probably won't work. Probably not going to work for you. It's worked for other clients. We're going to send it through DocuSign. And why don't we, there could be some complicated things in there. And why don't we get 10 minutes and I can walk you through and you can DocuSign it while we're right on the call. Here's a crazy idea. Suggest I stop by your office next Thursday. Suggest you invite me in. Not sure if this will work for you. Use these terms where you want to tell a prospect what to do. Use these terms to get them to do what you want them to do. And I'll give you a homework assignment. Take these 3 items, and when you're at a store in the next week or two, Home Depot, Lowe's, you name it, go to a service person and say, you probably can't help me find blank. And you will have a person following you around the store and bringing you exactly where you want to go. Go to a hotel and say, chances are this probably won't work. You don't have any rooms to upgrade me to. They might just upgrade you. Tell people they can't do something, they will do the exact opposite. I've got tons of stories. Pre-COVID, it hasn't happened in a while, but I'll get texts from people traveling and they'll go, I just got upgraded again. It worked like a charm. When they check into hotels or on flights and crazy stuff happens, put these into your arsenal. So I'm going to give you this. I know we're bumping the hour. So these are some messages. You can wordsmith them a little bit, but when somebody does ghost you, these are some messages that we've created. You can use them as they are. You can modify them to your own liking, but they go in a sequence. And these are some words that say, hey, listen, not sure what happened. I probably dropped the ball. Could you do me a favor and give me a call back? Blah, blah, blah. These are things that put us into a vulnerable state. This is kind of the bonus to pull people out so that they actually make that phone call back to you when they are ghosting you. So this is how you get out of it. Here's the downside. Chip, I'm going to just call you for a second. Most people join when they join Sandler training and they hear some of these types of messages. They love them. I don't know. Would you agree with that? They love when we say things like, hey, you probably couldn't, give me a call back or things like that. Would you say most people like that stuff at Sandler?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I get clients that go, Dave, this is awesome. I can't wait to use it. It worked. Let me use it again. These are great for pulling you out of being ghosted. Our goal is not to get ghosted at all. So while we teach this stuff, it's great, it's cool, it works. I really don't want folks using it. I'd like to have better, open, honest conversations where we either get on the calendar or don't. And then we advance forward and life is good and everybody feels good about what we're doing. You guys will get the deck. You'll get this. Again, no need to copy it. You're welcome to use it. And by the way, if anybody has a question, like Dave, you went fast, or I have a question about this. I know a couple of folks on the phone that I've got some relationships with. If you want to call me or email me and have a quick conversation, you can certainly do that. In no way, back to our first slide, does it mean you're doing business. It simply means you got a question for me. So don't feel like, oh my God, if I call that guy from Sandler, he's got some tricks up his sleeve and he's gonna do some voodoo and get me to become a client. No, if you have a question, pick up the phone, give a holler. Happy to help out.
David Trapani, wow. One of the most powerful programs we've ever had here, and you led a great program this week. I know that the feedback has been nothing but positive through private chats and open communications. I will send this recording to anybody that wants it, but everyone already has access to things. One, this presentation has been dropped into the chat here in Zoom. So if you are here and you want it, it's available. Two, there's two ways you can get a hold of David Trapani. I dropped his LinkedIn profile in the chat and also his email address. Lean on him. He's a very powerful partner and will bring value, as we have found out here clearly today. And that if you enjoyed today's presentation and program, know that we will continue to have these here in the NerdWise universe. So just keep an eye out on your emails because I'll always communicate them. They're always going to happen on a Wednesday between 2 to 3 p.m. These are exclusive and private to you and your partners internally. So feel free to tell your other sales team members, your marketing department, your other C-level executives. I don't care who they are. As long as they're on your team, they're on our team. So with that, thank you all for being here. And if you want the presentation or a recording, just shoot me an email. I promise to get it to you as soon as it's available. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.